Hey, this is Dr. Allen. In this lesson, we're going to talk about connective tissue. Okay, these are your objectives for connective tissue. We're going to talk about the different types of tissue and list their functions and give you examples of each. So there are 4 classifications of connective tissue, and they're listed here. The first one is called, it's a long name, connective tissue proper. And that consists of fat tissue and fibrous tissues. You also have blood, bone, and cartilage. And so those are the 4 main classifications of connective tissue we'll talk about today. What does connective tissue do? You can see it's listed here. It can either bind and support structures like your bone and cartilage and ligaments and stuff. It can protect structures like adipose tissue can protect your internal organs. It can insulate. So again, adipose tissue helps to, is a layer, that layer of fat can help to keep things warm. It can store reserves of fuel, like again, adipose tissue. um, and then, but it also can store other things like your bone stores calcium for use in other metabolic processes. And it can transport substances, for example, blood is a nice example of transporting via connective tissue. So let's take a look at some common components of connective tissue, and this is um, kind of a connective tissue proper, perhaps. But essentially we have 3 main things. We have what's called the ground substance right here. And that's kind of listed right here, or shown right here, ground substance. That's this kind of this stuff that's in between these other things, right? That's in between the fibers, in between the cells, ground substance. And the fibers are part of connective tissue. So in this example, we have 3 types. We have collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. Am I going to show this diagram and say, what is this orange fiber called? No, I don't want you to know that. I mean, that's kind of silly. But what I do want you to know is that there are these 3 different types of fibers, and they kind of have different functions depending on the tissue itself. And then you have various cells within the connective tissue. So here we have, here's an example of a fat cell. Something called a mast cell, a neutrophil, which is a type of white blood cell, something called a fibroblast, a macrophage, another white blood cell called a lymphocyte. And so that's kind of the main components of this connective tissue. Okay, let's talk about ground substance. That's this stuff right here. It's that filler material. And so it consists of several things. One is called interstitial fluid. That's just basically fluid that exists between cells. It has cell adhesion proteins, and these are proteins that help hold cells together and help maintain that structure. And it has what's called proteoglycans. And what is a proteoglycan? Well, a proteoglycan is something that has a protein, and it has this thing called a glycosaminoglycan. Well, for short, we could just say GAG. GAG. You may have heard of some of these GAGs. Some of these are sold as nutritional supplements. So glucosamine, chondroitin, hyaluronic acid. If you go to a health food store or a vitamin section, you probably see some examples of that. Why would you take these supplements? Well, maybe if you have some issue with your tendons or joints, or you're concerned about other connective tissue issues in your body. Next we have the fibers, and we said there's 3 different fibers. There's collagen fibers, and they're considered to be thick fibers. And so in this diagram here is pointing out to this thick fiber over here. Okay. Elastic fibers are generally thin. So here's your example here of the elastic fiber. And you can see relative to the collagen, these are thinner. And then you have what's called reticular fibers, and these are short, fine branching fibers. And so when you take a look at this diagram here, that's this very, very light blue fiber, and you can kind of see how it branches like that. They're very fine. But those are 3 different types of fibers within connective tissue. So here's elicit cells we talked about before, fibroblasts, mast cells, so on and so forth. I added some of these here, chondroblasts, osteoblasts. Chondro means cartilage, so chondroblast is a cell that's in cartilage, and osteo means bone, so osteoblasts are cells that are in bone tissue. Adipocytes, adipose means fat, so they're the cells in fatty tissue. And then we have leukocytes and erythrocytes. Leuko means white, erythro means red, so these are white blood cells and red blood cells. And so those are the cells in the blood connective tissue. You can classify connective tissue as shown in this diagram here. I took this from your text. So again, we have connective tissue proper, you have cartilage, bone, and blood. So within connective tissue proper, it can be either loose or it could be dense. Dense tissue could either be regular, irregular, or elastic. And then loose connective tissue could be called areolar, adipose, or reticular. When it comes to cartilage, there's three types of cartilage. There's hyaline cartilage, there's elastic cartilage, and there's fibrocartilage. Now, over the next several slides, I'm going to show you examples of each of these connective tissues. I'm going to want you to be able to recognize not only these tissues, but where they might be located in the body. So here's your first one. Loose connective tissue. It's called areolar tissue. It's a loose connective tissue. This areolar tissue is, like I said, it's loose, so it's that's that example we were showing in the thing with the collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and other cells. And here's kind of a microscopic view of it. You can kind of see the different fibers and the different cells that's in there, but it's kind of like this loose, thin branching network. Areolar tissue generally surrounds organs and capillaries to help to give it cushioning, helps to play a little role in inflammation and some other things. Areolar connective tissue. Another type of loose connective tissue is adipose. Adipose means fat. And so where is this located? Well, a lot of it is located under the skin. It could be inside of the abdomen, like inside of the abdominal cavity surrounding organs. And it's also located in breast tissue. So here's a microscopic view of adipose tissue. You can see that it's very, very thin-walled. Right, here's an example. So it's a very, very thin wall, and kind of pushed off to the side is this little dark spot. That's the nucleus. You can see the nucleus kind of pushed off to the side. So what's all of this stuff here, this white stuff in the middle? That's fat, right? Specifically, it's a triglyceride. Okay, remember before we talked about the macromolecules? Triglycerides are the lipids that are stored inside of adipose tissue, and it's there for not only to do things like give you cushioning and keep you warm, but it's also a way to store energy for a later date. And then as far as loose connective tissue goes, we have what's called reticular connective tissue. This is what it looks like under the microscope here. You can see there's a lot more cells in this tissue compared to the other one, with just a few little strands of fibers and that sort of thing. But lots more cells, a lot more white blood cells or lymphocytes. So where do you see this reticular tissue? Well, you see them in lymph nodes, you see it in bone marrow, you see it in the spleen. And that's areas where there's lots of white cells that serve that particular function within that organ. Next, we have dense connective tissue. Okay, so the first one we're talking about is called regular dense connective tissue. This is found in tendons and ligaments. And observe how this kind of looks here. This very orderly structure. It's kind of wavy, but they generally kind of have the same general flow to it. It kind of has like this right here, right? Here we say this is some nuclei of fibroblasts. You can kind of see that little dark spot there. But a lot of these pink fibers are collagen fibers, right? So if you imagine a tendon or a ligament, it tends to be kind of linear like this, but it's also very, very, very strong in order to do their functions. And now we have a dense connective tissue, but this is called irregular dense. Now notice the difference here, right? So before they were all kind of uniform and straight, but here they're all kind of like wiggly, basically irregular. Okay. These collagen fibers compared to the nice straight ones, they're just kind of all over the place. Where is irregular dense connective tissue? Well, it's in the fibrous joint capsules, like in your shoulder joint. It's also within the dermis of your skin. And then for dense connective tissue, we have elastic type, meaning that it's more stretchy, if you will. So lots of elastic fibers in this tissue compared to the other ones we talked about that had collagen fibers. So where would you want to have kind of this elasticy thick tissue? Well, major arteries. So in this case, this is the aorta. You see right here, this is that major artery that comes out of the heart. You want to have it be stretchy so that as you know the pulse of blood is getting pushed through, the artery walls can kind of stretch out and then kind of return to its normal shape. So when you're feeling like if you feel your pulse like in your wrist, that stretching, that pulsation, that's secondary to this elastic tissue in the arteries. Now we have cartilage. So I said there was three types of cartilage. One is called hyaline cartilage. This is the kind of cartilage that's on the ends of long bones, like say in your knee, helps to cushion things. It's the cartilage of your nose. It's also the cartilage rings of your trachea and your larynx. Here you can also see in this image, there's this costal cartilage, the cartilage around the ribs, kind of in this, you can kind of see it's this bluish color here. This is what it looks like microscopically. Okay, so there's within these little what we call lacunae, little pockets, if you will, there are chondrocytes. Remember, I said a chondrocyte is a cartilage cell because chondro means cartilage. And then this other stuff here, this kind of this pinkish stuff is called matrix. That's the characteristic feel of cartilage. So if you wiggle your nose, you feel how it's kind of firm, yet also a little bit flexible. That's the nature of this hyaline cartilage. It's this extracellular matrix. You can also have elastic cartilage. So this kind of looks a little funny, doesn't it? Um, but similar to the hyaline cartilage, you have these chondrocytes in the lacunae, right here, you see that? But instead of like that pink stuff, that's pink matrix, there are additional elastic fibers in there, and that's what these little dark purple lines are. Those are elastic fibers. So that gives that cartilage a little more flexibility. So here's your example of elastic cartilage is your ear. If you notice, your ear is much more flexible compared to, say, the tip of your nose. That's because it's elastic cartilage. And then finally, you have this thing called fibrocartilage. So we had hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, now we have fibrocartilage. Look how this looks more like that dense, regular connective tissue here, see? So, because these are collagen fibers, and they all kind of have this general shape and flow. You see that? Here inside of the lacunae, the little pockets, are the chondrocytes, the cartilage cells. But it's in just a few places, this fibrocartilage, and that's because the function of it requires it to have this particular property. So we have the discs between the vertebrae in your spine. The pubic symphysis, that's that little part of the pelvis that joins the pelvic bones together. And then in your knee joint, some of the discs within that joint are made of this fibrocartilage. So structure helps to determine the function. Next up we have bone. Bone is a type of connective tissue. And we don't have to worry about all the different classifications. There's just bone. And this is kind of what it looks like here. You can kind of see they look like little trunks of a tree, right? You can see how these little ring-shaped things here. We'll get into more of the structure of this bone tissue when we get to the skeletal system. But for now, just recognize this is what bone looks like under the microscope. And then I also want you to be able to recognize these 3 cell types in bone tissue. And they all say osteo in front of them, right? So osteo means bone. So you have osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and osteocytes. Just be able to recognize that for now. When we get to the skeletal system, we'll talk more specifically about those different cells. And then finally we have blood, which is the last type of connective tissue. Blood consists of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and then the extracellular matrix, if you will, is called plasma. So here's a microscopic view of blood like this. These little pink things here are those erythrocytes, or the red blood cells. These darker ones here are the white blood cells. You might say, well, they don't look white to me. That's just more of a classification. The reason why they're the different colors is because of the staining of the cells when they prepare the slide. But one thing I want you to notice here about these cells is that the white blood cells have these nuclei in there. Right? See that dark purple structure inside of the cell? Those are nuclei. Or this is typically a single nucleus within these white blood cells. But the red blood cells don't have nuclei. You don't see a nucleus in the red blood cells. That's because for red blood cells to function at their peak, they need to get rid of the nuclei because the red cells need to be packed with as much hemoglobin as possible to do their function, which is to carry oxygen and other stuff. Okay, we'll learn about blood at the beginning of ANP2, but for now, that's it for connective tissue. I'll see you at the next lesson.